This is the Group B Wiki, and I'm going to be conducting an interview to discuss the organizational culture and leading change in Crimson Tide. So Coos and Posner posit that you cannot change jobs every time you do not agree with your leader, even though that may seem like the best solution at the time. Instead, they believe that you need to find common ground. In fact, you will often find that you have the same goals, just different ideas of how to get to them. Cal, do you think Captain Ramsey and Lieutenant Commander Hunter had the same goal? Did they try to find the common ground?
Yeah, thanks, Noel. I'd say yes. I mean, both ultimately wanted to protect America. They just had different beliefs on how to do that. Captain Ramsey thought that they had to strike first without the risk of attack while trying to receive the remainder of the partial message. And then Lieutenant Commander Hunter believed it was his responsibility and the responsibility of the boat to receive the rest of the message, since the consequences of using nuclear weapons are devastating. Earlier in the movie, when the submarine was heading out to sea, you saw Captain Ramsey asked Lieutenant Commander Hunter to always be straight with him. Essentially he was asking for constructive insubordination, as described by Coos and Posner, as you mentioned. The captain did not follow his own request later in the movie because he became so entrenched in his belief that he was right. He refused to listen to Lieutenant Commander Hunter, which caused an escalation in tensions, and then ultimately, of course, led to the mutiny. So,
thanks, Cal. In his book, Organizational Culture and Leadership, Edgar Schein states, organizational learning, development, and planned change cannot be understood without considering culture as a primary source of resistance to change. At the macro level, the Navy has a culture, and within that culture is the subculture on the submarine. Lieutenant Commander Hunter is new to the submarine, but he still tries to enact change. Catherine, does the culture of the crew affect how successful Lieutenant Commander Hunter is?
That's an awesome question, first off. So the CEO had built the culture on the ship of following all orders, regardless, of agreement without question. This culture can be seen in the conversation between the XO and WEPS around 34 minutes into the film. So Lieutenant Commander Hunter was complaining that Captain Ramsey should not have run the drill during the fire in the galley, but WEPS responded by saying it wasn't the CEO's fault. He explained to the CEO that WEPS explained to Lieutenant Commander Hunter that he can try to fight the CEO or he can figure out his style so that he can get along with them. The CO is a definite hard ass who sees the XO as this well-educated intellectual that does not have the real world experience that the captain has from driving ships for the past 20 years. So Yolitz explains that culture is built initially by handling routine functions in a particular fashion. So once the group learns what works for them, they continue to operate in that same way until it becomes a comfortable habit. Captain Ramsey had built a culture in his likeness of members who follow orders no matter what. Since this culture is so ingrained into the crew, and the CEO has that ungiving personality, it is difficult for the XO to enact change. Most of the crew stands behind the CEO, especially initially within the movie. Lieutenant Commander has to build up trust through his actions and use persuasion to start winning over the crew and the crew's respect and followership. All right.
Great perspective, Captain. Thank you. Jeff, there's a scene around 21 minutes into the movie that helped foreshadow the differences between Captain Ramsey and Lieutenant Commander Hunter. The officers were sitting in the wardroom having a discussion when Captain Ramsey called Lieutenant Commander Hunter complicated because he did not directly answer whether he thought the United States should have used nuclear weapons in Japan. The captain then stated when he got trained, all the Navy wanted was simple. They gave him a command, a checklist, a target, a button, and would tell him when to push the button. He was never required to know the why. However, now the Navy wants complicated. Does this scene indicate the Navy is going through an organizational change?
Yeah, so this scene in particular, I really liked. I watched it again recently, and it really does set the tone for the rest of the movie. So at the macro level, this scene alludes to the Navy's subtle shift from creating yes people who are trained to do just what they're told without knowing about the why, and possibly even questioning it as well. Changing the culture is difficult because everyone is indoctrinated into the culture when they join. For example, Matthew Ford refers to the Cotter's 8-step process for leading change, with instituting cultural change as the final step due to complexity. To be successful to the organization needs to prove, or excuse me, to be successful, the organization needs to prove the results will be better than the old version, reward positive actions towards the change, reinforce the new culture with new employees, and communicate the change as well. The Navy followed these steps by indoctrinating new members during training, as indicated by Captain Ramsey's comments. The new style is also aligned with the culture of the world at the time, since most people of that generation wanted to know the why. This made it easy for the Navy to show the new way of leading will be better for subordinates. In particular, General John Shad provided leadership advice, including ensuring that members know what the mission is and why they're asked to complete the mission. Additionally, this compassion helps build the trust and strengthens the commitment of the followers. Lieutenant Commander Hunter brought into the organizational change, but Captain Ramsey appeared to be struggling with the change. Cotter also points out that when an organizational change, it will lose some of its people. This was seen in the final scene in the movie when Captain Ramsey, he voluntarily retires, while at the same time, in an emotional way, he recommends Lieutenant Commander Hunter for command. During this, he realized his way of leading no longer fit the model of the Navy, and it was time for him to inevitably move on.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Those were some great points. Justin, what is your perspective on whether you think Captain Ramsey was a manager or a leader?
Thanks, Noel. Captain Ramsey is a very effective manager, but he's not a leader. He has extensive knowledge and experience relating to the Navy and operating a submarine during the Cold War. He maintained compliance from the crew, ensuring directed tasks were executed to achieve mission success. John Maxwell provides 4 myths about leadership, and Captain Ramsey seems to fall within 3 of those myths. The first is the management myth, where people believe managers and leaders are the same. However, managers only maintain a direction while leaders can influence positive direction. As discussed earlier, Captain Ramsey gained all of his experience during a time when he was only taught how to follow orders. He was never expected to understand the intent behind why he was carrying out those orders. This institutionalization made him rigid in his management style, preventing him from having the freedom to imagine and implement a unique vision. The second myth is the knowledge myth, which states many people believe someone is a good leader just because they are intelligent. Captain Ramsey does demonstrate his technical and even intellectual knowledge throughout the movie, but it's not enough to make him a good leader. His technical knowledge does help during intense situations, including his ability to immediately react when under attack by a Russian submarine. Finally, Maxwell believes the position myth is the greatest misunderstanding about leadership. Just because someone is in a senior position does not make them a good leader. Captain Ramsey's position allowed him to give orders with the expectation that they would be followed by his subordinates. Gene Klan breaks position power into 3 categories: legitimate, reward, and coercive powers. Captain Ramsey clearly has legitimate power as the commanding officer and as an 06. We don't see much reward power used in the movie, but he does use coercive power by threatening people who do not follow his commands and harshly running drills even during emergencies. Klan argues that even though coercive power can gain immediate results, it lacks the ability to gain long-term commitment. This prevents Captain Ramsey from being a true leader. Captain Ramsey fits neatly into Colonel George Aldridge's classification of maintainers. Maintainers fall between the dictators and leaders. It is the largest group and is comprised of managers who use a mix of rewards and punishments to achieve results through compliance.
Thank you, Justin. It was a great comprehensive answer. Cal, how about Lieutenant Commander Hunter? Do you think he is a manager or a leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I see Lieutenant Commander Hunter having more of the leadership traits than Captain Ramsey, if you will, whereas Captain Ramsey a little bit more on the managerial side. Leaders are kind of agents of change who can influence people to follow them voluntarily. So even though Lieutenant Commander Hunter didn't have everyone on the submarine follow him, those that did were doing so knowing that he wasn't the superior officer on board, which is putting them directly at risk. He was able to gain the followership because they believed in what he was doing. Right, his leadership style was apparent following the fight between a couple of the petty officers. He knew tensions were high and that the threat of nuclear war. He knew tensions were high, right, with the threat of nuclear war. So instead of inflicting a strict punishment, he counseled Petty Officer Mahoney with a combination of possible consequences if it happens again, along with kind of a levity and personal touches that he uses. This helped win Petty Officer Mahoney's respect and assistance later in the movie. So this is one of the things we've been going over in class, right? That Colonel Aldridge has been about, which is that you build trust through character and competence, and that translates into influence, which is leadership, right? And I thought that Hunter did a good job of that. Lieutenant Commander Hunter was able to earn his trust through his actions, basically doing what was right. He knew that if they launched a nuclear weapon, the world would be changed forever. So he attempted to persuade the captain that he needed to receive the remainder of the broken message before launching a preemptive strike. And even though he couldn't convince the captain, his actions definitely convinced others and inspired them to change their thoughts. So this included the chief of the boat, Cobb, who followed Lieutenant Commander Hunter, even though Cobb stated he partially agreed with the captain's assessment. And then Cobb knew that Lieutenant Commander Hunter was doing the right thing by following the policy through. So and I'd say he demonstrated more leadership traits.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And that concludes today's interview.